Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. This is a repeat episode of the Tinnitus Collaborative Sessions with Dr. Jennifer Gans. My name is Dr. Craig Casper. For those of you who do not know me, I'm a clinical audiologist and tinnitus specialist based in New York City. I've been practicing for a bit, and I am the founder and managing director of NYHD, which is the Institute for Hearing and Balance, as well as our satellite offices that are found around the New York City metropolitan area, are NYHD tinnitus care offices, where we provide nothing but tinnitus care to those patients in northern New Jersey and Westchester, Connecticut, Long Island area. And again, just want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. And for some of you coming back to see Dr. Gans speak, these collaborative sessions, these Tinnitus Collaborative Sessions, we did an entire series in the fall of 2024, where the whole goal was really to take a 360-degree look at what was going on in the world of tinnitus care, where we had experts that spanned the whole kind of spectrum of tinnitus care, and even outside of the world of tinnitus, that was some of the things were very much applicable to what we do clinically for patients who are bothered and even suffering from the symptom of tinnitus. We had Dr. Jason Leyendecker, who spoke on tinnitus retraining therapy. We had Dr. Janet Kennedy speak about sleep health. We had Dr. Rachel Cook talk about some really interesting things that we're doing in the modern tinnitus world, specifically biometric tracking and looking at things like heart rate variability and sleep and all of those interesting things. We also had Patrick Lynch, who is the current president of the American Tinnitus Association, talk about all the interesting things and amazing things they're up to with the American Tinnitus Association. We had Brian Brown, who's another clinical psychologist, talk about brain health. So for those of you who missed any of those sessions, I would highly encourage you just to visit the website that's in the top right corner there. Whoops, yep, on that side. It says Beyond Tinnitus, but it is Beyond, and it's .us. And that will give you access to all of the recorded sessions that we had last year. So for now, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Dr. Jennifer Gans. The last time that we did this session, she had a power outage in San Francisco, which completely disrupted the session. It's definitely not her fault. We were talking before that it is beautiful and sunny in San Francisco right now, so we will not encounter any technical issues this evening. So just to give an introduction to Dr. Gans, Dr. Jennifer Gans is a licensed clinical psychologist. As I mentioned, she is in private practice in San Francisco, and she is trained to work with individuals who are both hearing as well as deaf, struggling with problems such as anxiety disorders, depression, stress management, sleep difficulty, and concentration problems related to navigating the challenges of tinnitus, hyperacusis, hearing loss, cochlear implantation, and other sound sensitivity disorders. I've known Dr. Gans for some time, a bunch of years at this point. We even, I guess it was during COVID, we did a session on a program that she designed called Mindfulness-Based Tinnitus Stress Reduction. I'm sure she'll touch on that a bit tonight. But Dr. Gans is a wonderful speaker. She is highly, highly invested in the tinnitus space. And I do not want to ruin anything more by talking any further. So what I'm going to do is actually bring Dr. Gans up to the stage here and welcome her tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Gans. We're going to unmute you there so you can actually be heard. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Great. Oops. Great. Greg, or Dr. Casper, I really want to thank you for having me here today. It is truly a joy to be here. You are a pillar in the field. And, it's wonderful to get a bunch of big minds together to try to navigate something that is simple but not easy. So that probably sums up tinnitus in many ways. But anyway, so we don't have all evening or all day, depending on where you're located. And so I'm just going to dive right in.
Sounds good. I'll jump off here and I'll let you do the work.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, it really is a joy to be with you here today. I'm a clinical psychologist, as Dr. Casper mentioned, and people often ask me, well, gosh, you're a clinical psychologist. Why are you dealing with tinnitus? And so That's a very good question. And I think that it's going to seem very clear as we finish our talk today why a clinical psychologist would get into the area of tinnitus, because today we're going to be looking at the person behind tinnitus. And so how I arrived in the field of tinnitus. So as Dr. Casper mentioned, I've done pretty much all things in the world of deafness. First, I got a master's in deaf education from Gallaudet University, but then continued on for my doctorate in psychology, and just always wove in deafness. Now, within that, I've done everything from things related to deaf culture, big D, but then also when I came out here to San Francisco, I started working at the UCSF Cochlear Implant Center, wonderful center here in San Francisco. And over the years that I was there, many people, obviously everybody had severe to profound hearing loss that was coming in for a cochlear implant, but many people were mentioning tinnitus, and tinnitus was this stepchild. Nobody really wanted to touch it. Nobody had any answers. And it, when I don't know, I guess it's part of my personality. When I see something that nobody wants to touch, it makes me kind of attracted to it and to want to figure out more. So, first of all, as a clinical psychologist, being on the Cochlear Implant Center, my job was to help people be better users of a cochlear implant. For example, if depression was getting in the way, anxiety was getting in the way, I would help the person get prepared to effectively use a cochlear implant. So really a very special clinic that we have out here. But so many people were coming in with tinnitus and nobody wanted to touch it. At the same time, I was starting to learn about the amazing work of Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. Back in way back, 1979, he started a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so he is a pillar in the field. And I was at that time, kind of curious about tinnitus, and he was starting to develop some research on his mindfulness-based stress reduction program, MBSR, with chronic pain. And anytime I see something that's helpful with chronic pain, it made me wonder, I wonder if this could be helpful with somebody with bothersome tinnitus. And so I started to learn more about it. And I actually ended up doing a research study at UCSF where I took his amazing 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course and I flipped it, or I created mindfulness-based tinnitus stress reduction course, which was basically taking the nuts and bolts of his amazing work and making it very specific to the person with bothersome tinnitus. So did the research, got amazing results, but there was only one of me and, many people out there obviously with bothersome tinnitus. So I then went on the path of flipping it into an online course. And so now anybody, as you can see in the byline here, anybody can look at mindfultinnitusrelief.com and you will see this 8-week course that really, we'll talk more about it as the hour progresses. But really, it really touches on 3 things, which is actually in my work in tinnitus in general. Everything I do, everything I say, every way I think about tinnitus falls within 3 areas. Number 1, helping a person feel less anxiety around tinnitus. Number 2, making sure they're an expert in what tinnitus is. Okay, this is critical. And then in the case of the 8-week program, helping people to develop a meditation program over an 8-week period for them to then develop for the rest of their lives, which really serve the purpose of, I think of it as tuning their orchestra, tuning the orchestra of the brain. Many of us are walking around, leaving the house in the morning without tuning our brain, which we would never go to a symphony and not expect the conductor or the concertmaster to make sure all the sections of the symphony were playing in tune. So it always feels funny to me that we would leave the house in the morning without tuning our own orchestra. But anyway, so I digress a little bit, but that is what I see the 8-week program doing, is helping people to start a mindfulness meditation program or practice so that they can, tune their orchestra so they can start to respond to tinnitus rather than react in old and not helpful ways. But So that's just a little bit about me. We're going to kind of walk a little bit away from the program, although I, of course, recommend it to anybody with bothersome tinnitus. And today we're going to talk about the person behind tinnitus, which, as a clinical psychologist, really has been an undying fascination for me. So let's dive in. Okay. So before I really go forward, I also want to put in a little caveat. When I talk about tinnitus, I can sound kind of easy breezy or a little bit flippant, or some of the words that I might choose to use don't seem very, I don't know, don't seem to always touch on the suffering that's oftentimes behind tinnitus. So I just want to say before I get started that it is not lost on me that tinnitus has created massive suffering in many, many people's lives. Okay. And so, but at the same time, and you'll see as we walk through this, it's also very hard for me to get too excited about this benign body sensation. And so let me kind of set us up here so that people who are watching this understand that, after thousands of hours of sitting with people with bothersome tinnitus and just, basing my career on this, it is not lost on me that this can be devastating, absolutely devastating. And, but I think that something that often gets overlooked is looking beyond tinnitus. And that's a little bit where I'm going to try to orient us today. So let's start out with a story. Okay, I'm going to weave a story now about tinnitus. And so for many of you who might have seen me talk before, my story hasn't changed that much over the last 15 or so years. So I might be repeating something you've heard, but it's all good information. So let's just dive right in. So let's start out with a definition of what tinnitus is. Okay, tinnitus is a benign body sensation that the brain thinks is important to pay attention to, when in fact it can safely push it into the background where other benign body sensations go. So I'll say that probably 15 times today. So tinnitus is a benign body sensation that the brain has misunderstood as important to pay attention to, when in fact it's not. Now, the word benign, I have to say, the word benign, it doesn't mean good. Okay. I guess the root of the word benign is, would lead somebody to think it means good. But benign simply means that it is not an indication of a greater illness. Now, for example, nobody wants a tumor, right? But you sure hope your tumor is benign. Okay. So by way of example, tinnitus, nobody wants it, but thank goodness it's benign. Okay, so that's what I mean by benign. It is not an indication of a greater illness. Now, let's talk about demographics. Okay, so we have 50 million Americans. That's a huge number, 50 million Americans that are walking the streets of our country with tinnitus. Okay, now that large number doesn't give us very good information. It's just too big of a number, and there's too much variance in it. So let's try to parse it out a little bit. So 20 million of that 50 million have tinnitus, and they are the ones that go to their doctor and say, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't know what this is, this ringing, this sound. You got to help me. Okay. So that 20 million of the 50 million we'll call the bothersome group. Okay. So if you and I do the math together, that leaves 30 million of that 50 million. The other 30 million Americans are walking the streets of this country with tinnitus, and they don't care. So of that 30 million, when I say they don't care, you might walk up to them on the street, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, do you have tinnitus? And they might say this, oh, hold on one second. Let me check. Oh yeah, I have tinnitus. Yeah. And then you go on with the conversation, and it goes where other benign body sensations go. It doesn't really hold any place in consciousness. It goes into the background. So for the sake of our talk today, we're going to call that the non-bothersome group. Okay, so 30 million non-bothersome group, 20 million bothersome group. And if you're listening today, you've probably, most definitely, probably fall into the 20 million group. Or if you are a clinician that works with people in this 20 million group, this is the group we're going to talk about today. This is the bothersome group. And so I often kind of joke, I don't know the first thing about the 30 million group because they don't come into my office, right? But I know a lot. I have learned a lot about this 20 million bothersome group. And I've now sat for thousands of hours with people in this group, and I've learned a thing or two. And I find that it would be silly of me not to share with you what I've learned about this group, as it might give you some information into your own situation, into a loved one's situation, or into a patient situation, however you come to this talk today. So my job, I tell my clients, is my job is not to get rid of tinnitus. Okay, I have no control of that. So if you and I are going to spend our time trying to get rid of tinnitus, I'm not going to like my job that much because I will only have variable success. And I often say, well, trying to get rid of your tinnitus, I mean, you probably have already tried to do that. And that's not to say you won't get rid of your tinnitus at some point in your lives, but I'm saying that I can't really touch that. So I'm not going to put a lot of energy into getting rid of it. However, I 100% know that anybody in the bothersome group can shift tinnitus from the bothersome group, the 20 million bothersome group, into the 30 million non-bothersome group. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I often ask my patients, and maybe you could ask yourselves this right now, if you have a benign body sensation for the rest of your life and it doesn't bother you, can you be okay with that? I certainly can. I mean, if I have a benign body sensation that doesn't bother me, I mean, to be honest with you, I could name probably 50 benign body sensations that I'm not necessarily happy about, but it doesn't really take up my mental energy. So in any event, hopefully I get a yes to that, because I 100% know that anybody can shift tinnitus from the bothersome group into the non-bothersome group. And so if we can get on board with that being the effective cure, then it's only a matter of time. Okay, there's a big, hoopla about, oh man, where's the cure? Let's search for the cure, and what's wrong with these doctors? What's wrong with these researchers that they haven't found the pill or the procedure that's going to make this, that is going to bring a cure to tinnitus? And I argue, well, you can't really fix, or you can't cure something that's not broken. Okay. And to be honest with you, we have an effective cure, because if you shift tinnitus from bothersome to non-bothersome, I don't know, you're kind of effectively cured of tinnitus. If it doesn't bother you, who cares? So that's really the framework from which we're speaking today. It's the framework from which I speak to my patients. And let's just move on with this effective cure. Let's tell the story that leads us there. Now, there's a lot of, talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, a wonderful, form of therapy. And there's even research showing its efficacy with bothersome tinnitus. Cognitive behavioral therapy is wonderful. Mindfulness, obviously, and as the name implies, in mindfulness-based tinnitus stress reduction, I have put a lot of work and a lot of effort into bringing mindfulness to the care of tinnitus. But today, I'm not going to talk from a cognitive behavioral place. I'm not going to talk from a mindfulness place. I'm going to talk from a place of logic. Okay? People respond well to logic. Okay? Tinnitus is not rocket science. People say, oh, they don't even know what it is. Well, you know what? We do. And so we want to come at this from a place of logic. So let's get into it. So let's start with, what is tinnitus? What is tinnitus? We certainly do know what tinnitus is, but one way to really understand it is by looking at other body systems. When I want to understand a certain system within the body, I kind of look to other body systems to help me understand it. I mean, we're all one system. We have different systems within us that work in relatively similar ways in many respects. So let's talk about phantom limb sensation. Okay. So I'm going to use my hand as an example. So here I have my hand. My hand is literally here, but my hand is really here. This is where all the sensations come to. This is where all the commands come from. And this is where all the memories of my hand are. Okay, so God forbid, let's say I cut my hand off. All of a sudden, my brain starts to get really uneasy because it doesn't like gaps. It loves to fill things in. I mean, we even have a blind spot that we're born with. I'm putting my finger across my face here, trying to look for it, which I can't even perceive it. But anyway, we're all born with a blind spot, and our brain, because we're born with a blind spot, just kind of naturally fills it in. The brain doesn't like gaps. It loves to fill things in. And so when we look out at the horizon, we're not seeing horizon and then a big spot and then the horizon again. Our magical brain just fills it in for us. Okay, so it's a wonderful thing the brain does. But anyway, so let's get back to phantom limb sensation. I've lost my hand, God forbid. And my brain starts to say, wait a minute, where's my brain? It has to be here. I was born with a hand. I was born with a hand. It has to be here. And so the brain starts to search and search and search, and it starts to really get fired up because it's not finding the hand. So it starts to search and search and search and search, and all those neurons start to overfire, and then boom, it creates the sensation as if the hand were still there. Okay, so that's phantom limb sensation. Okay, many of us already know about it. If not, you can certainly look into that further. But now let's look at the ears. So inside the ear, we have I'm going to break it into 3 parts. We have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Today, we're just going to talk about the inner ear. Inside the inner ear, we have this tiny snail-shaped organ called the cochlea. Okay, so I'm going like this in a circle just to kind of show how it turns in on itself. So on the inner lining of this snail shell-like cochlea, we have these tiny little cilia or hair cells that line it. Now, let's take that snail shell and let's unravel it. So take it and imagine I'm unraveling it right in front of us so that it's right here in front of us. And it has all those little tiny hair cells sticking up. Okay, the high frequency hair cells are here. The low frequency hair cells are down here. And just like a piano, or actually it's a backwards piano, but just like a piano, every hair cell, every tone is in between. So I'm going to digress for a moment, but here the Italians think we think the Italians created the piano when in fact we've been walking around with a piano inside of our brain this whole time. So anyway, I'm also fascinated with music, so that's a fun fact. But anyway, so we have our cochlea in front of us with the hair cells. High frequency hair cells are here, low frequency hair cells are down here. And let's start to roll it back up again, starting at the low notes. So we're going to roll it, roll it, roll it, roll it, roll it, roll it. Mouth of the cochlea is here, and it corresponds to the high frequency hair cells, and deep, deep, deep protected, unless there's something like Meniere's disease or other ototoxic drugs that can affect the inner ear. The low frequency hair cells are better protected, I should say, than the higher frequency hair cells that are at the mouth of the cochlea. Now, every day since we were born, air comes through the cochlea, and waves of air come in through the ear canal and brush into the cochlea. And depending on where the frequency of the air coming in, it corresponds to a specific frequency, which then turns to an electrical signal, goes to the auditory cortex, goes to the auditory nerve, and then to the auditory cortex, and we get the sensation of sound. So coming back to the cochlea, look what happens here. Look at the physiology of the ear. So over time, everybody loses hair cells. You know why? Because these high frequency hair cells are incredibly vulnerable. Actually, the ear is actually very strong, but they are the more vulnerable than, let's say, the lower frequency hair cells. So over time, air comes through the ear and starts to chafe off the highest frequency hair cells first. As a matter of fact, everybody throughout their lifetime, we even have a word for it called presbyacusis. It's called hearing loss with age. So our ears never shut off. And so over time, the highest frequency hair cells usually get burned off first. And so when that happens, going back to phantom limb sensation, the brain says, wait a minute, where's that frequency? I've always heard that frequency. It certainly has to be here. So the brain starts to search for it. It doesn't like gaps. It likes to fill things in. And when it's missing something, it searches. So it starts to look for it and search and search and search and search and search. And boom, there we get the sound of tinnitus. or the sensation, I should say, of tinnitus that the person with bothersome tinnitus perceives, or tinnitus for that matter perceives. And so, with all due respect, here I am going to sound very easy breezy about it, but what I'm saying is that your silly brain is searching for a sound that it's no longer receiving. That's all that's going on here. Your brain is overworking and over searching for a sound that it's no longer able to perceive. In the absence of sound, the brain creates sound. And so inside our mind's eye, we have what I consider a camera lens of sorts. Okay, so imagine this, a camera lens in our mind. When something is if something is fearful, fascinating, or frustrating, what ends up happening is our mind zooms in on it. And the mind's eye zooms in just like a camera lens, and it looks at what it's looking at very, very closely. And it gets very locked and loaded on this, and it can see what it's looking at with amazing clarity, but it can't see anything else. Now, this beautiful brain of ours, this beautiful mind of ours can also open up the aperture. And what you're looking at is obviously, it's still there, but it's within the context of everything else around it. Okay. So what's happening with the person with bothersome tinnitus, or the person who notices tinnitus, is all of a sudden the brain is searching for the sound that it's no longer receiving. The brain is overstimulated, overreacting, and it's creating the sensation that it's, the sound that it's missing. And all of a sudden the mind's eye goes whoosh. Oh my God, what is that? Oh my gosh. And for people who fall into the 20 million group, into the bothersome category of tinnitus, it starts to get wrapped up in a story. The camera lens gets locked and loaded, and a story starts to get created around it. And the story, I'm just guessing, but might sound something like this. Oh no, my God, what is that sound? Oh my God, maybe I have a brain tumor. Oh no, this is all my fault for all the music I listened to when I was a kid. Oh my God, what if this means I'm going to lose my hearing? Oh no, I'm not going to be able to work. I can't focus. So I'm being a little dramatic, but that's the story that I often hear. When a person notices tinnitus for the very first time, many people remember the exact day, remember the exact time of day or night. They remember what they were doing. And you could mark that day on your calendar, and it becomes, it becomes the day tinnitus was noticed as being bothersome. And so the lens has gotten locked and loaded. And what's happened is the lens got stuck. And what's keeping that lens stuck are the stories that can get tightly wound around it. Okay, like this. And so here we have this benign body sensation, but the story that it gets wrapped up in is a Gordian knot of I don't know, I think of it almost like glue that's kind of keeping the lens from being able to do what the lens should be doing, which is opening up and closing and opening up and closing. Instead, the person with bothersome tinnitus is stuck. And in many ways, I see tinnitus as, and you can't bill for this, so I wouldn't write this on an insurance form, but it's a stuck disorder. The person with bothersome tinnitus, there's nothing broken. The brain is simply searching for a sound that it's no longer receiving. But the person, the 20 million Americans, this is just the United States, this person that falls into the bothersome group is stuck. Their brain is locked and loaded on this body sensation. And it is misunderstood, this body sensation, and it has put it into the fear category, the fear, frustration category. And it's staying there because it's locked up in this story. I can't tell you how many people, it's funny, the first question that I ask to my clients when they come in is, so what do you think tinnitus is? Because it's always interesting to know where they're coming from, what they've learned, what they haven't learned about tinnitus. And I can't tell you how many people I have sitting on my couch in my office saying, I've had this for 10 years, but I don't really even know what it is. That's not okay. Okay, as we spoke about before, I call this the tinnitus triad, or the tinnitus healing triad. Is my goals when I'm working with somebody with tinnitus, and the gist of our story today is everything I'm saying is in the effort of helping a person reduce anxiety around tinnitus, make sure they're an expert in what it is. Now, this part is very important because humans are meaning-making creatures. When we understand something, we feel less anxious. Okay, even if that something is a big mountain to climb, at least when we understand what's in front of us, we can start to make plans and we can start to reduce some of the anxiety that can get in the way of us being able to execute on plans. So this is the cognitive piece of my work. This is the cognitive piece of tinnitus care that's critical, understanding what exactly tinnitus is. And then number 3, I have my clients, or part of our work together is cobbling together a management plan that helps people to the effective cure of shifting tinnitus from the 20 million bothersome group into the 30 million non-bothersome group. And then our work is done. So I want to talk now about the title of our talk today and the part that I find most fascinating, the person behind tinnitus. So I said before that I have now sat for thousands of hours, and it's true, thousands of hours with people with bothersome tinnitus. And so I've learned so much about this group, and I want to talk about that right now. So in much the same way that somebody who wants to bake a cake, there are certain ingredients that are in every single cake. There are base ingredients that go into making a cake. Now you can throw in chocolate, you can throw in vanilla, you can throw in strawberries, what have you. But at its base, there are critical ingredients that make up the cake. So by way of example, when in tinnitus, obviously everybody is so unique and I get all kinds of people in my office, but at their base, every single one of them, not 53%, not 89%, not 99.9%, but 100% of the people that I see have 3 things in common, 3 ingredients in common. And you need to know this, this is what I've learned after thousands of hours. I mean, I want to be able to share this with anybody that will listen. So I want you now to think about somebody with bothersome tinnitus. It might be you. It might be a loved one. It might be a friend. It might be a patient that you see. It might be somebody who's no longer with us, whatever the case may be. But you're here today, obviously, because you care about that person with bothersome tinnitus. And so every single person has these 3 things in common. Now, we've already talked about the first one. First one is hearing loss. Everybody with tinnitus has some form of hearing loss. Okay, now, this we're not going to talk too much more about right now, but I do actually have many people coming into my office with tinnitus, and when I tell them that a necessary ingredient to the tinnitus puzzle is here's some form of hearing loss, they'll look at me like, oh, no, you don't know what you're talking about, because I just went to my audiologist, they did an audiogram, they told me that my hearing is just perfect. And my immediate reaction is, well, congratulations. That's awesome. You have really, really great hearing. And that is something to celebrate. But when we go to our audiologist, our hearing is being measured from 250 kilohertz to 8,000 kilohertz. And so I wonder who listening today knows how far out humans actually hear. Well, I'm going to give you the answer, to 20,000 kilohertz. That's right, 20,000. So when we're going to our amazing audiologist's office and we are getting our audiograms taken, they're actually measuring us from 250 kilohertz to 8,000 kilohertz. Why? Because this is where our hearing world is. Okay, this is where all our voice, our speech sounds are. This is where all the environmental sounds are. This is where music is. This is where the birds chirping. This is where our hearing world happens. And so we definitely have extended audiograms that are possible, but we really want to know what's happening between 250 and 8,000. We don't necessarily have time to test further out, or the money or the interest in testing further out. But if you were to look at the audiogram of somebody who comes in saying they have perfect hearing and tinnitus, they do have excellent hearing. So we would see from the low frequencies first, from the 250 range, their audiogram would look like this. Normal. They'd get to 8,000. And then somewhere after that, I don't know if this is showing on the screen very well, but then we see that ski slope as it gets beyond 8,000. So again, I digress a bit, but even people that don't have measurable or measured hearing loss, they too have some form of hearing loss. Okay, so that's needs to be explained to some of the patients that come in, and with excellent hearing, and again, that's something to celebrate. Anyway, so back to our 3 ingredients. Number 1, hearing loss, but we're not going to talk much more about that today. But this is a necessary ingredient. Number 2, and we are going to talk about this today, stress. Everybody in that 20 million group, everyone with bothersome tinnitus has some form of stress, and in all different degrees and levels, but usually too much. And then number 3, everybody that has bothersome tinnitus that I see in my practice has an amazing personality. That's right. Everybody has an amazing personality. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, Jennifer is just, trying to flatter us or, make us feel at ease. Actually, maybe this is why I love my work so much, is because I get to work with people with amazing personalities. And they are amazing personalities, because what I'm going to describe to you is a kind of person that everybody wants to have around them in some degree. We certainly want to employ them. So this person I'm going to describe, this amazing personality, is what makes them very successful in their lives. It's what it's what people love about them, their employers love about them. It's what they love about themselves. And so we're not talking about getting rid of this amazing personality, but what we want to do here is identify the underbelly of this amazing personality that's pulling them down. So they get to walk off and have this amazing personality without being brought down by the underbelly. And so the underbelly to this amazing personality, we want to certainly take a look at. Now, I'm going to take a moment. I want you to think about that person with bothersome tinnitus. They have to have bothersome tinnitus. Non-bothersome, I haven't studied that group very much, but bring to mind somebody with bothersome tinnitus. Now, what I found, the amazing personality I'm going to describe to you, is that they are the kind of person that's very alert and aware and alive on this earth. Okay. And for example, they will walk into a room and they will scan the room. And if they spot a problem, they're going to latch onto it and they're going to have trouble letting it go until they figure it out. Okay. Now, I don't mean this by way of diagnosis. This is not meant as a diagnosis, but really just maybe a descriptor of part of their personality. Sometimes they almost have an obsessive compulsive quality to the way they go about certain things. So I can't see the people on this meeting today, but I would imagine a lot of you are kind of shaking your head. Yeah, that does describe me. I am the kind of person that spots a problem, latches onto it, and really has trouble letting it go until I figure it out. Now, this is an amazing quality. Now, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to employ somebody who is at work and spots a problem, latches on, and doesn't let go until they figure it out? But this quality that works very well from 9 to 5 doesn't always work at the dinner table at night. So this amazing personality also has this underbelly. Now, what I've just described to you about this person, and we're here to talk about this today, is again, we have this tinnitus as the benign body sensation, but there's a fire below it. And this fire is anxiety. Okay. So, it's hard to get too excited about this benign body sensation. Now, it has stolen the show, literally. I mean, the mind has gotten locked and loaded on this benign body sensation. We can talk a little bit more about what's happening in the brain of the person with bothersome tinnitus. But right now, I want to talk about the fire that burns below it. Okay. Now, the top 3 complaints of people with bothersome tinnitus are anxiety, depression, and sleep difficulty. Now, anxiety is primary. Okay. Now, for many people, and they might have been born this way. I mean, some of us have a more suggestible amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. I'll talk about it in a moment because I think it's also very, very pertinent. But so these people can be managing anxiety throughout their whole lives and just have an overabundance of it. So with bothersome tinnitus, I think anxiety is primary. Now, being anxious for a really, really long time can be very depressing. And I often think that sleep difficulty can be caused by depression and anxiety, oftentimes them bouncing back and forth. So really what we're talking about here is anxiety as being the fire, the spark, the maintainer of tinnitus bother in the mind. Now let's talk about the brain for a moment. Again, everything seems to fit nicely into threes with tinnitus, at least in the way I describe it. But let's talk about the brain in three parts. Okay, first we have the brain stem, which is obviously a subconscious part of our brain. It's the first part of the brain to develop. We sometimes call it the reptilian brain. It's part of our brain that is in control of our heart rate, respiration, sleep-wake cycles, all the things that we don't have to spend much time thinking about during the day because we got other things going on. So that's the first part of the brain to develop, subconscious. Now, second part of the brain to develop is called the limbic system. It's the midbrain. Now, again, the midbrain is subconscious, so it's not in our conscious control. Subconscious, and there's a small little almond-shaped area in the limbic system called the amygdala. And this amygdala we associate as our fear center. And the job of the amygdala, and I'm really breaking things down into very basic pieces, but the job of the amygdala is to take in information from our external world and take in information from our internal world and make a decision, make a choice. Is this sensation a potential danger and I'd better keep my mind locked and loaded on it because it could mean my life? Or I don't know what it is, so it feels dangerous, so I better keep my attention on it. Or is this sensation that I'm experiencing not that relevant, benign, not that interesting, and it can very safely go into the background? So I argue that the person with bothersome tinnitus made a calculation error. Their amygdala made a mistake. It picked up the tinnitus sensation, which is very real, of course, picked up the tinnitus sensation for the first time, and the amygdala started to freak out, and it was very fearful of this sensation. And so what it did was, in many cases, it didn't know what it was. And so it put it into the fear category, where the amygdala, kept the mind locked and loaded on it. Now, the amygdala triggers the autonomic nervous system. It triggers the fight or flight response. So it can almost feel like a trauma on the first day when somebody notices tinnitus as being bothersome, and the amygdala gets really kind of anxious around it, real tight around it, and it keeps it locked and loaded in the fear center of the brain, or in the fear category of the brain. When, darn it made a mistake. It misunderstood this body sensation and it put it in the wrong category, when it really, for all intents and purposes, could have put it where other benign body sensations go and put it into the background. So, people make mistakes, brains make mistakes. And so really what we're dealing with is the brain has made an error. And now, as people who are bothered by tinnitus, it's your job to unlink tinnitus from fear so that it can go where it belongs, into the background. Is that easy to do? No, it's simple, but not easy. Okay. When I say it's simple, is that, well, let me go back to the third part of the brain to develop. Now, the third part of the brain to develop is the cortex, the outer bark of the brain. And I'm going to talk today about the prefrontal cortex. Okay, now this is the part of the brain where all the magic happens, right? For us humans, this is our conscious control. This is the executive functioning is what we call it. These are all the things we want our teenagers to be better at. Things like stopping and thinking before acting, reasoning, empathy, where we place our attention, regulating our emotions. Like if we're feeling, just this wave of anxiety, we can use our conscious brain to relax ourselves. Okay. So, and there's many other things that our beautiful executive functionings do for us. So our prefrontal cortex, this part is connected to our amygdala. Now it's connected, this conscious part of our brain is connected to this subconscious part of the brain with down-regulating neuropeptides. One of them, for example, is gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA. And so what GABA can do is it can send these it sends this neuropeptide, or the prefrontal cortex can send a neuropeptide down to the amygdala and say, you know what, amygdala, I think you're overreacting. This is actually, we know from our talk today with Jennifer that this is a benign body sensation. So I understand that, you're in the habit of getting really excited about tinnitus and you just don't know what to do with it. But I'm here to send down a signal to you that you're safe and it's okay to take tinnitus out of your clutches and put it where other benign body sensations can safely go. And so today I'm talking to your prefrontal cortex. And what the person with bothersome tinnitus, I'm filling your prefrontal cortex with accurate information so that you can reason with a subconscious part of your brain that is not really in your conscious control. So what I'm essentially saying is that the effective cure for tinnitus is largely using the brain to change the brain. Okay. And so, again, this amazing personality, anxiety is that fire that's burning below it because the amygdala took in tinnitus and put it into the wrong category. Now, that's the cognitive piece. That's the logical piece of tinnitus. Now we want to talk a little bit about the second ingredient that we spoke about. Remember, the first one was hearing loss. That's the seed, or that's the initial flame that gets tinnitus, started in the brain. But the second thing is stress. Okay. Now, in a brain under stress, we end up reacting to the world around us. Okay, instead of responding. Okay, I mean, I'm sure all of you out there have had a poor night's sleep, perhaps many times. I don't know about you, but after a bad night's sleep, I'm constantly reacting. I'm yelling at my kids. I'm, making mistakes. I'm locking my keys in the car. I'm locking, whatever. When we are under stress, we end up, we do a lot of knee-jerk reactions. And the person with bothersome tinnitus is knee-jerk reacting their tinnitus. Okay, they're creating stories around it like, oh God, this is the worst thing in the world. Nobody understands it. Where's the cure? All these stories that get wrapped around it. These can become kind of neural habits or reactions that we have to tinnitus. Now, the person who's able to reduce stress creates space, creates freedom to be able to choose a different response. Now, what the ultimate goal that we have, or the key to shifting tinnitus from bothersome to non-bothersome, is in a sense finding a way to make tinnitus boring for the brain. Okay, why do I say that? Now, because the brain doesn't function, it doesn't focus on things that are boring. Okay, it's, inside our mind's eye, we've got this amazing triage system. Okay, I think of a hospital, you go into an emergency room in a hospital, you hope they have a good triage system where their job is to keep people alive. So if a gunshot wound comes in, they go into the number 1 slot. And if you've been waiting there for 5 hours, I'm sorry, you're going to end up waiting for 6 hours because they're putting the gunshot wound or the most imminent danger into the number 1 slot, and everybody else has to shuffle down. Well, inside our brain or inside our mind, we also have a triage system. There is a finite number of things that the human mind can pay attention to at any given time. And so what the mind does for us is it does a bit of a calculation. Okay, we take in all this stimuli, and the mind has to very quickly decide, okay, what is most relevant and what goes into the number 1 slot and I need to pay attention to, and what other things can I either let go out of my awareness or never actually get into my awareness to begin with. And so the problem that a person with bothersome tinnitus has is that the sensation of tinnitus, when it comes down to it, never even deserved to get into the emergency room. And for the person with bothersome tinnitus with this amazing personality, it's in the number 1 slot and it's stuck. And so how does a person, get unlink tinnitus from fear? And we need to use our cognitive abilities, use our prefrontal cortex to convince ourselves that we're safe. That, oh, I used to think that tinnitus meant that I had a brain tumor or something, when now what I'm learning is that my brain, because of my amazing personality, because I don't miss much, picked up on this signal during a time usually of stress and misunderstood my own body, took that sensation, put it into the fear category, and then it stayed there because it got, trapped in this Gordian knot of stories, of horror stories. And so after educating a person as to what tinnitus is, it's hard to be afraid of a paper tiger. In many ways, tinnitus is a paper tiger. Now, a paper tiger is just what that sounds like. It's, it's a tiger, but it's made of paper. There's nothing really to fear. And so tinnitus, yes, it feels scary like a tiger, but it's made of paper. And so let's talk about stress. Okay, when I'm working with my tinnitus patients, I think of them, believe it or not, like a Stradivarius. For those of you or musicians out there or know about violins, a Stradivarius is one of the most beautiful instruments made. They're very precious. In fact, I learned recently that Joshua Bell plays a $14 million Stradivarius. So when I'm sitting with my clients, I'm thinking of their brain, their mind, their selves as this beautiful Stradivarius. Now, every Stradivarius, as people with violins know, has 4 pegs. And if you take those 4 pegs and you crank up the strings really, really, really tight, and then let's say I picked up this Stradivarius to start playing it, it doesn't sound very good. Okay, that doesn't sound like music. And so do I throw out the Stradivarius because it's not sounding very good? No. What do? I hope everybody out there knows this. You simply tune the instrument, loosen the strings a little. And so when I'm sitting with my tinnitus patients, I'm thinking to myself, well, gosh, why is this person walking around with their strings too tight? And how can we help them to get back into balance, to tune their orchestra, tune their instrument, tune their Stradivarius, their mind, so that they're able to have choice and freedom and create music out of life rather than cacophony. And so, I really put on, perhaps one of the most important things that I do in my work is I help people to understand that you have to tune your own orchestra. Now, there are many ways to do that. Now, I think that mindfulness is a mindfulness meditation, which is also, focused awareness, call it what you want. It's really, paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. Okay. That's focused awareness. And so when we bring our attention to, for example, the breath, and the mind starts to wander, we note where the mind has gone, because oftentimes we don't even know where our monkey mind is going. We note where the mind has gone, we let it go, and we come right back to the breath. And then boom, the mind shoots off again, which, by the way, is kind of the way the brain is designed. So, the brain is designed to wander. So the mind wanders off. But when we're meditating, we are aware that our mind is wandering. We note where it's gone. We say, you know what? I don't have to hold on to this wave. Let it go and come right back to the breath. And you do this over and over and over again. And it really helps us to really tune the orchestra of the brain, much like a concert master would in a symphony. Okay, again, another music analogy that I love to use is the brain as a symphony. One of my daughters once had asked me a question. She said, Mom, tell me something about the brain. So of course I went to the computer and I printed out, or I looked at all these different pictures of the brain, and I saw one and I was like, wow, that kind of looks like an orchestra. We have the auditory cortex, we have the occipital lobe, we have the parietal lobe, we have the medulla. We have all these different sections of the brain, and individually they're beautiful, but they don't really do much unless they are in concert with other parts of the brain working together in harmony. And so if you think about an orchestra, we have the violin section, the trombones, the clarinets, the flutes, what have you. And each section obviously is a beautiful instrument in and of itself, but it's not a symphony until they all start to communicate and talk well together. And if one instrument is playing in the key of F and everybody else is playing in the key of A, and it's not going to sound so good. And so I really implore the people that I'm working with is, to tune their orchestra. And again, going back to mindfulness meditation, I bring this to the field of tinnitus because nobody else had yet. But there are many ways to tune our orchestra, and a focused awareness or meditation is really one of many ways. And so I implore anybody with bothersome tinnitus to really make a list of all the things that they do to relax themselves. Anything that relaxes you will make your tinnitus less bothersome. Anything that stresses you out will make it more bothersome. So, we all are responsible for tuning our orchestra. And part of doing that is creating some space, some choice and freedom, which is what we do when we are more relaxed. When we're more stressed, there's no choice and freedom. We're reacting. When we create that space, we can then respond to tinnitus in new, more effective ways. We can, when tinnitus, all of a sudden we notice it and we, there it is, we can say, oh, wait a minute. I remember that lecture that Jennifer gave, and she helped me to understand that my silly brain is misunderstanding a body sensation. It put it in the danger category, and actually, my brain is locked and loaded on it, but I'm actually very safe to allow it to be there. And after a while, the brain gets bored with it. It's just not that interesting. And after a while, the brain forgets to check. And after a while, the brain disconnects tinnitus from fear after responding to it with, kind of vanilla words like paper tiger, or, my brain is simply misunderstanding a body sensation, or, I don't have to like it, but there it is. Using our cognition to convince our brain to use our prefrontal cortex to send down information to our amygdala to say, chill out. Okay. And we do that enough times, and all of a sudden the connection between tinnitus and fear and frustration starts to dissipate. And so this is the key. This is the piece de resistance. This is the answer to shifting tinnitus from bothersome to non-bothersome, is putting tinnitus where it belongs, in the background. Now, again, let me say this, it can feel like a mountain to climb. And for many people it is. And so I implore people with tinnitus to go to the source, to go to the fire that's keeping tinnitus alive. And that fire is a fire of anxiety. Okay. And, I am noticing that, you can see I can talk about this for hours, but we're already at the hour mark. For those of you who are willing to stay on, I'm going to talk first about the spectrum of choices that the person with bothersome tinnitus has at their disposal. And then for those who can stay even later, I'm going to do a 5-minute breathing exercise that really shows you how to move into tinnitus. Okay. And really shows you how to, one of the tools to taking the judgment and taking the stories away from the tinnitus sensation. We're going to do a 5-minute example of it through a breathing exercise. It's also another way to kind of loosen the strings, because as I mentioned, people with bothersome tinnitus have this amazing personality that is largely very anxious. So they're walking around with their strings too tight. And so a mindfulness meditation exercise, a breathing exercise, let's say, is a wonderful way to tune your orchestra and to reduce the stress. So let's talk about this spectrum of things that we can do to help ourselves. Okay. Let's start with 0. We'll talk about 0 and then to 100. Okay. 0 is really, I think, education. I have had a lot of patients that come into me. I educate them as to what tinnitus is, and they look at me like, oh my God, I had no idea. Thank you for telling me this. They walk out and I never see them again. And I'd like to think that means it was a success, and they were able to, once they got the accurate information, they were able to use their prefrontal cortex, where the accurate information goes, to relax the part of their brain, through accurate education, so that tinnitus can go where it belongs. So education is critical, and it doesn't take that long, really, just to get educated about it. Although I could go into how much junk there is out on the internet about tinnitus, and even very intelligent doctors can misunderstand tinnitus. So that's 0. And then we can go all the way on the spectrum to medication. Okay. Now, again, going back to 0, there's also meditation. Now, meditation is wonderful, or focused awareness, I should call it, because sometimes the word meditation can mean so many different things, and really just focusing our awareness. So let's just call it that. I love mindfulness meditation because it doesn't cost any money to meditate. It you can use it at 3:00 in the afternoon and 3:00 in the morning. And it essentially goes with you everywhere. And it not only helps you with tinnitus, it genuinely helps you to tune the orchestra of your brain. So not only tinnitus is less bothersome, but everything is less bothersome when we approach life from a place of responding rather than reacting. So we have obviously meditation. Now, I mentioned before, and this I send all of you out there to figure out on your own, is finding ways to find relaxation in your lives, to reduce stress. Sometimes, or many times, a lot of us are working these high-powered jobs or these very stressful jobs. Just because your employer tells you that this is what you need to be doing, I don't know that it's necessarily good for your body. So this might mean, I've never told somebody they have to quit their job, but I've certainly said you have to learn how to work differently. And so, that oftentimes is a very important piece of this puzzle, is learning how to reduce external stress that can come in. And so let's just talk for a moment while I have you about 2 medications. Now, again, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't prescribe medications. But again, I've sat for thousands of hours with people with bothersome tinnitus, and I want to share with you what I've learned to be helpful. So again, we're talking about anxiety largely. Education. You get the education, you reduce the anxiety, and all of a sudden, tinnitus becomes boring to the brain and goes into the background. Now, when somebody is feeling very, very anxious, many of us were, I think, born that way. We just were born with a more suggestible amygdala, or maybe life events have taken us over and we've gone for a very long time with a very anxious mind. And so sometimes, sometimes medications can be helpful in the temporary or in the future, but that's obviously your choice. And so I just want to talk about 2 medications in particular that are very helpful for the people that are gripped with anxiety and are just not able to manage it, either through therapy or through finding ways of relaxation or tuning their orchestra. They're feeling stuck and they can't. And so, that we have benzodiazepines like Xanax and stuff, which are wonderful drugs if, you've popped your switch and your autonomic nervous system has gone to the moon and your fight or flight response is, off to the races. So, people who go to an emergency room with a panic attack, Xanax and other benzodiazepines, those are wonderful drugs because they're quick and dirty and they get it done. The problem is those aren't really long-term answers because we can get addicted to them and they just don't work very well long-term. However, what I've found to be helpful with people with bothersome tinnitus are these 2 SSRIs, serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, and one is called Zoloft, the other one is called Lexapro. Now, many of you know that there are many SSRIs out there. Many of us have heard of Prozac, for example, but Prozac wouldn't be an SSRI that would be helpful for a person with bothersome tinnitus, because if you took Prozac, it's an upregulating antidepressant, or an upregulating SSRI, which would make anybody with anxiety go through the roof. But we've found that these 2 SSRIs in particular, we've noticed after they've been on the market for a long time, that, they're really good for anxiety, depression, and sleep difficulty. And lo and behold, these were the 3 of the top 3 complaints of people with bothersome tinnitus. So we have in these SSRIs help with anxiety, primary, depression, and sleep difficulty. Now, what I like about these SSRIs is that they've done so much research into them, and they even give them to pregnant women. Now, we know that anytime they're going to allow a pregnant woman to use a drug, they've done their testing and they have really looked into this on a long-term basis, and there are no deleterious effects. And so, again, people with bothersome tinnitus with this amazing personality tend to be very drug sensitive. Like if they take a drug, they get all the side effects. And, so what I often suggest to these people is you got to go slow. If you choose to take an SSRI like Zoloft or Lexapro because anxiety is gripping you, start small. Start at a very, very low dose and work your way up very slowly. Maybe half a dose for 4 days, and then go up to the starter dose, and then do that for another 4 days, and just kind of do stepwise. I find that that's been very helpful to the people with bothersome tinnitus. And with these drugs, try it for 3 months. And if it doesn't help you, then come off it. If it does help you, you might want to stay in for another 3 months. And then at 6 months, say, gee, I think I'd like to stop now or keep on going. And the good news is these are not addictive drugs. These, and having anxiety is also not healthy for the body. And so in many ways, if you do the cost benefit analysis, taking a drug like an SSRI like Zoloft or Lexapro actually in its ability to kind of lower the thermostat so that your anxiety falls somewhere in this zone. You still feel anxiety, of course, but it doesn't hit the thermostat and trip the switch and go, set your autonomic nervous system in fight or flight response into a tizzy. So basically what these SSRIs are doing is they're keeping you just under the line. Okay. And so I think of it like the difference between sleeping on a bed of nails and sleeping on a mattress. Okay. Who in their right mind wouldn't choose to sleep on a mattress, right? Not a bed of nails. And so, again, from 0 to 100, obviously you don't want to take medication until you've exhausted other avenues because, nobody wants to be on medication. But in many ways, these two drugs in particular are actually again, that cost benefit ratio are actually more healthy than not. Okay, because anxiety can be very difficult on the system. All right, I could go on, and there's so many different topics within there that I'd like to go further into. But for those willing to sit back and do a breathing exercise, let's give this a try. Okay, so what I'm going to ask is for everybody to sit in a comfortable position. Again, I can't see you out there, but I'm hoping you are in a comfortable position in a chair or wherever you're sitting. And sit back and close your eyes. And just take a moment to arrive. You have arrived. This is the only moment that we ever really have to be and to make choices for our future. So let's not miss this moment. Let's sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare to move inwards. Maybe let's start by going from head to toe or toe to head and checking in with your body as a whole. Maybe you notice you're holding tension somewhere where it's not serving you. Maybe your shoulders are higher than they need to be. Maybe you notice your jaw is clenched. So just take this moment to prepare by allowing gravity to do what gravity does and just pull you down into the chair. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to follow waves around. I'm going to ring this bell, and I want you to feel with your whole body and, of course, your ears, feel the waves of air that come and hit you with each sound, listening most closely to the last 5 seconds until you can't hear the sound of the bell anymore. And now, shifting all of your awareness to rest on a different sort of wave, but a wave nonetheless. The wave of just this breath. Riding the waves of the breath. Maybe landing your attention on where you feel the breath the most. Maybe it's as you bring in air through your nose, as it hits the back of your throat. or as you notice the rise and fall of your belly with each inhalation and exhalation. After a while, it can almost even begin to feel as if you're on a raft in the water, just going up and down, up and down. Taking in and letting go. Bringing curiosity, openness, acceptance, and compassion to yourself with each wave of breath. No need to judge, just simply riding the waves of the breath. And if you're like most people, your mind might wander. And this is actually an opportunity. When the mind wanders, that's a moment where you become present, where you can note where the mind has gone, but then let it go and simply bring your attention right back to rest gently on just this breath. With curiosity, openness, acceptance, and compassion for yourself, noting if the mind leaves the breath, note where the mind goes, let it go, and just come right back. And if your mind should leave the breath 100 times in the next minute or two, that's 100 opportunities to be compassionate with yourself. Moment by moment by moment. And now we're going to try something challenging, more challenging. Let's see if you can place that same curiosity, openness, acceptance, and compassion that we place gently on the breath. Let's see if you can place that same quality on this wave of tinnitus. Or on this wave of sound, just simply riding the waves of tinnitus, but with curiosity, openness, acceptance, and compassion for yourself. Much like you rode the waves of the breath, simply and gently riding waves of tinnitus. And if you notice that the mind goes off to a thought or you feel an emotion come up, simply note where the mind is gone or the emotion that comes up and let it go, and just place your even hovering attention just as gently on this wave of tinnitus. Riding the waves of tinnitus. And of course, you can always come back to your tuning fork, to your home base, to your home, to your breath. And so we're going to end today's breathing exercise with a poem by Rumi called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Well, welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows that violently sweep your house empty of all of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He or she may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful to whomever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Well, I can't see anybody's face, but I'm going to make an assumption that you're feeling a little bit more centered after a 5-minute breathing exercise. And I really want to thank you all today for having me here. You can see that I will talk for hours on this topic, and maybe Dr. Casper will have me back to maybe, kind of riff off of maybe one of these topics. But if we have time, perhaps some questions, or you're always welcome to contact me at go to mindfultinnitusrelief.com, and you can even get an email off that and be in touch. And again, I want to thank you all today for listening to tinnitus and the role of anxiety.
Well, Dr. Gans, it's always, I've heard you speak, I don't know, I can't count how many times I've heard you speak at this point, but every time that I do listen to you, I learn there's another nuance, there's another element, another facet of the conversation that just kind of gets opened up. And I think it's really important, as you've been saying, pretty much ever since I've known you, is that tinnitus is this multi-dimensional thing. We can never really look at it with just one lens. Even if that lens is stuck, that's usually the one that gets us in most trouble, right? Mm-hmm. So your view is unique. It is much needed in terms of the educational elements that patients so desperately need, because what we know, as you said, is that there's such a lack of information and there's such a dearth of misinformation out there. That voices like yours really need to be heard louder. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today. I know that we've gone over by a bit here tonight, but I'm sure that last 5 or 7 minutes had the ability just to get everybody kind of centered today. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Dr. Gans has also been very kind and generous in opening up herself for questions. If anybody has specific questions related to what she has spoken about, go to mindfultinnitusrelief.com. If you guys are interested in seeing the previous episodes and versions and sessions that we've done for the Tinnitus Collaborative Sessions, please go to the website at the bottom of your screen. One other thing that I wanted to say is I wanted just to extend a very big thank you to the team at Neuromod, who has created this linear device, the FDA-approved device. These sessions are not sponsored. These are independent sessions, but they played an instrumental role in helping us get the word out to all of you. So we just want to say thank you very much to them for playing their role in helping those who are really bothered and suffering from tinnitus. So with that said, I think we're gonna press pause on this, but definitely have Dr. Gans back as we continue these sessions in the future. Always appreciate having her on and really learn a lot listening to Dr. Gans. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Gans, for everything that you shared with us tonight. And we will see all of you again soon.